here we're going to cover a surplus question with consumer surplus and producer surplus and how that relates to international trade. So question number 30 reads, the figure above shows the U.S. demand and the U.S. supply of shirts. If the world price of shirts is $20, then what happens to consumer surplus compared to no trade equilibrium? So basically what we're trying to find here is how does consumer surplus change when we have our equilibrium price change to a world price of 20. So our equilibrium price is here. Equilibrium price EQ, and then here's QEQ, quantity equilibrium and price of equilibrium. And then the question says we change our price to 20 because now we're entering world trade. So we have a new price here. So now we have to find consumer surplus. So how do you find consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is everything above the price. So here above $20 and below the demand curve. So if we want to find a change in consumer surplus, let's find what it was originally and what it will become, and then we'll subtract the two to find the difference, the change. So first, to find the original, here's our original consumer surplus, so it's above the price of 28, the price equilibrium, and it's below the demand curve. So it's this entire area. So we have old consumer surplus. 44 minus 28 is our height times our base 32 over 2. And what this is, it's just your triangle equation. It's base times height over 2. So we have 44 minus 28 times 32 equals 2, and that equals 256. So that's our old consumer surplus. Now let's find what the new consumer surplus is. So new consumer surplus. So again, let's find our height and our base. So where's our height? It's everything above the price. So here we have 20 is our price. So it's everything here and below the demand curve. So here's our demand curve, here's our price. That entire triangle. So our new consumer surplus is, what's our height? 44 minus 20 times our base. Let's see, it comes all the way out to 48 divided by 2. And our new consumer surplus becomes 576. And if you find the difference in that, 320, that's our change in consumer surplus. And part of the question asks is if it increases or decreases. Now we can see it was originally the small consumer surplus, but then it increased. So consumer surplus increased. And you can kind of think of that intuitively. If consumers have to pay originally 28, but now they only have to pay $20, that's a gain to consumer surplus. Consumers gain. They only have to pay $20, so that's a good thing. Now what if this question, instead of asking about consumer surplus, how does producer surplus change? So producer surplus is pretty similar, except it's kind of in a different area. So let's take this out and find what consumer surplus would be. So again, our world price is still 20. And our original price was the PQ right here. So producer surplus, instead of being everything above the price, it's everything below the price. So let's find our original first. So below this price EQ, here's our original, below the price, and above the supply curve, not below the demand curve, but above the supply curve. So it's that triangle there. So we'll find our old producer surplus, still using the same equation, base times height divided by 2. So we have, what's our height here? 28 minus 0, so 28. Actually, it only comes out to being to 12 in the figure. So 28 minus 12. And then times 32 is our base divided by 2. And that comes out to being 256. Now, what does it change to? So we have to find our new producer surplus. Remember that our world price is 20. So instead of being everything below 28, it's going to be everything below 20. So, again, everything below the price and above the supply curve is the producer surplus. So, we'll use this equation again, new producer surplus, 20 minus 12 times our new base comes out to being 16 divided by 2. This becomes 64. And our change ends up being, if you take the change in these two, it's 192. So that's our change, D for change, or delta for change. So if it was asking if it increased or decreased, you can tell originally we had a large producer surplus, but now it shrank to only this much. And you can think of that intuitively as well. If producers can charge a $28 price, they can make $28 off of each unit, but now they can only charge $20, then that's a loss for producers. So their producer surplus will shrink. They lose out when we have international trade in this situation. So that's how you solve surplus questions. You always use this formula, base times height divided by 2. You find that area by looking at your supply curves and your demand curves and taking into consideration price. Consumer surplus is everything above the price and below the demand curve. And producer surplus is below the price and above the supply curve.
The Teaching Center, UF's Learning Resource Center.